Hi there. The click track video. This is my click track video. Now, I've always been meaning to make one, but I had to sort of wait till I got my new sound system because it was sort of impossible to do so, which I still may improve upon. The click track. Nothing in musicians, up until not that long ago, and even now still, musicians, especially drummers, would freak out at the thought of, like, oh my god, I gotta go in the studio and play to a click track. Well, here's the deal. Because not that long ago, when we'd record to tape, magnetic tape, the old warm analog tape. Okay, in those days it was pretty difficult. The act itself wasn't difficult to edit it, but it wasn't a skill everybody had. So in those days, you pretty much had to go in, you do a few takes with the click track, and you kind of take what you got. Now, editing tape was done at much more expensive studios, and really good engineers knew how to do it. But two things. Even at a lot of studios in cities, like here in Chicago, you'd have studios that would have great boards and great Studer tape machines and stuff. But guys, folks, people really wouldn't know how to edit it that well. There's a skill and an art to it. They would literally take the tape and run it through a tape head, and it'd sound like this. It'd be like, and they'd get right to the point where they wanted to cut it. And they'd take it out and they'd cut it with chalk, and then they very carefully cut it with a razor blade. They get the other side and they tape it together like that. It's a time-consuming process. It takes a lot of skill. So by and large, for a lot of musicians, even if they recorded at nice studios at the tape machines, there really weren't editing capabilities. So you really had to be on the ball with the click when you recorded. And the extra onus really is with the drummer. We play discrete notes. We don't play, we're not really playing like when melodies with guitars and singing are over a click track, there's a lot more room, let's just say, for those musicians to be off, okay? Because they can kind of be more around it like this, and you don't really notice it, especially because they'll be singing some kind of a melodic line, okay? In fact, here's a quick thing. I remember years and years, like you'd get demos from people, right? And you might get a demo of somebody, a guitar player singing and playing a guitar to one of their songs. And you get to it, be like, wow, it sounds nice. And they'd be like, hey, let's just pump it. Let's just dump it. We'll bring it right up, bring the guitar up. We'll use the guitar in my vocal. But then they bring up the click that they played to. Well, as soon as you bring the click up in reference to it, you realize they were kind of not playing to the click that well at all. So even if I were to then, or a drummer would play exactly to the click they played to, it would sound off. And it would almost sound like the click in the drummer's off time, okay? So that's where a lot of the apprehension comes, or used to come, from drummers. And even now it still does. But by and large these days, the way they record in the past, since about 99, late 90s, I don't think they had quantization as such then. But at least in the last 10 years, they literally, you play along to a click or a sequencer, they can more or less kind of flick a switch and all the notes go, and it's all right on the grid. Okay? So you don't necessarily really have to, even as a drummer or anybody, play to a click that well. Okay, well, especially the drummer, okay? Because they can fix it for you in the computer. They can manually move notes around, or they can just flat out fix it all. But what they can also do after the fact now, which is interesting and done a lot, and they can humanize the final result. What they do is they'll take maybe what might be a half-assed drum performance to a click, quantize it, and then they run it through an algorithm or some kind of another device or program that humanizes it. So it might go to more or less constant tempo, then speed up a little, and then slow down. But remember, all these are gradual, okay? So if you imagine the grid, any speed differentiations are like this, okay? And those are, if you ever have those when recording to a click or not, those are the ones to have. It slightly speeds up or slightly slows down. Some of the speed ups and slowdowns might just be due to human nature, might not have anything to do in the songs. Like sometimes in a chorus, you might speed it up a teeny bit. In a small, quiet, sort of bridgy part, you might just slow it down a teeny bit, like an orchestra. I mean, music for years and years. There's no law ever that said you had to play exactly perfect time to anything, okay? Human beings cannot play perfect time. You can't, no matter who you are. There might be mathematically, sometimes statistically, where somebody might be playing the drums, and for maybe 15 seconds, like, wow, they were like absolutely micronomically right on. But people, we're humans, okay? In the human world, we approach perfection as far as skill of something, being able to do something, or we don't reach it. In the digital world, we can actually reach it, okay? So, with the click track, here's the deal. So, again, nowadays it can be repaired. Okay, you can kind of go and sort of play half-hours. I remember one time I had an engineer friend who had this lady in. They were doing a demo. This was back in '99. She wanted a drummer. I was going to go and she was going to play to a click. She was having a hard time playing to it. I got stuck in traffic. By the time I got down there, the engineer went in and played the drums. Very poorly, but more or less kind of to the click. And he was able, he didn't quantize it. I think he manually just moved all the notes. It sounded fine, okay? So there's the apprehension to the drummer these days. Is it really required? You don't have to get freaked out by it. But if you do want a nice solid take and you do want to play to the click well and you want it to be kind of like the old days where people would actually play to the click and that's what they'd use, there wouldn't be any micromanaging of notes, then you have to practice playing to a metronome, which is what a click is. But there's a couple things now too. They don't necessarily even, you don't have to use clicks anymore. They use sequencers. Well, nowadays they probably have sequencers that actually sound completely like real instruments. It might actually sound like a band playing, right? All you do is play along to it. But you used to have tuk, tuk, tuk. And then you'd have sequencers like or the famous Genesis Man on the Corner. Something like that. But anyway, so what we do now, this is advice for somebody who's never really played to a metronome or a click track. I mean, they're interchangeable. I'll tell you this, right off the bat, it's easier to play to a sequencer. If you play to something that's there's a lot more cues in there, okay? There's a lot more notes that are giving you, it's like if you were walking in the dark and you had a bunch of furniture next to you, it'd be a lot easier to go because you could feel it. But if you were totally in the dark, you'd be more apprehensive and kind of like, where am I going? That's a great analogy, actually, okay? So, and to show that a little more, if you're playing to a click and you have the click going like this, and you're going boom, ba, boom, ba, boom, boom, ba, da, ba, boom, ba, boom, ba, boom, boom. It's a lot easier to play to that at the consistent tempo the click is dictating than if you're going boom, dun, dun, boom, dun, ba, boom, boom, ba, boom, ba, boom. Like if that was your only cue, because in a larger space of time, you're more likely to, as human beings, get off that prescribed time that usually a digital device, in the older days an analog spring-loaded device, would dictate, okay? So, now there's a couple things about the click. You can, if you go back, people who don't play, let's say recordings not to a click, whether they're modern people decide not to use a click or the older days when they didn't use them, if you were to analyze their playing mathematically, there's a great website somebody made. It's called In Search of the Click Track. Look it up right now on Google, In Search of the Click Track. It's a great site. It can show you, they can say, well, you can spot generally if somebody was using a click or if they weren't, and they graph out. What they do, if I'm not mistaken, is they'll get a mean tempo they played at. They'll mathematically figure out, okay, well, generally the whole time is playing at 80 beats per second. But what they do is they graph how often he or she, the drummer, was playing a little faster than the average or a little lower, okay? And you'll get graphs, okay? You type in all kinds of old Police stuff and Zeppelin, and you'll see, the graphs kind of all over the place, okay? But now that doesn't mean that their time wasn't perfect. Remember, time as human beings, music is emotional. It is when you're performing it, and when the way people hear it. Symphonies don't play to click tracks, okay? It's human time. It's like acting. It's like conveying emotions. Symphonies are like da da dum bum 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 ba da dum bum 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 bum. Now in there, when you go to that more tension moment, it might speed up a little. In fact, it would. It might not, but generally speaking, our heartbeats are governed, well, by our hearts. Except that you notice when you're Bob chill and relaxed and you're sitting around like, hey, your heart might be like, doo, 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 doo. But if something happens, like, what's that noise outside? Doo, 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 doo. It speeds up, right? That's the nature of human emotionality, okay? So, What happened with the click track was it came around back in the day when they would start working on films, when they wanted to score films. Okay, wanted to put music to films. So what they do is they wanted the music in a perfect sort of Moxie silencio, where they could kind of use it and pop it in evenly and in certain chunks, in even chunks, okay? Might even have had something to do with the fact that film is usually 24 frames per second. I don't know. But that's really where it came about. As we got into the 60s and the 70s, they used it to, sometimes bands would come in and they necessarily wouldn't play. The drummer or the band would speed up a lot or slow down, and they'd say, all right, we'll play to a metronome or a click track. But there'd be a lot of editing there. Because generally, if somebody doesn't really have good time, forget about them having a good time or an easy time playing to a click track, okay? That's why, of course, back in the day, they'd often use studio folks that you never knew who they were, like Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer and some of these folks with like drums, or Steve Gadd or Jeff Porcaro later, or bass players like Carol Kay or whoever. But, so that's kind of the deal. But then what happened was with the click track is people really got used to, as production with music and stuff kind of came up, what started to happen is, that's my furnace. It's okay, it's not too loud. But what started to happen was people started really getting used to, like, with higher fidelity and better quality recordings. They wanted things, kind of everything to be perfect. They wanted the drums to sound all evenly nice and clean. They wanted a nice pure guitar sound. They wanted everybody playing as best they could, and therefore they sometimes wanted the time as perfect as they could. So they'd play along to click tracks. That's what happened, okay? Now in those days, you would literally run through whole takes to the click track playing. And if you were a great enough musician, it might have been a perfect take all the way through. Remember, it didn't necessarily mean you played exactly on the click the whole time. It means you just use the click to maintain a constant tempo. If you're playing to a click and you come out of a fill a little rushed or a little behind, and you're not really exactly on the click when you come out, well, two things generally can happen. You very slowly, and this is important, slowly get back onto the click, or sometimes you'll just might leave the click relatively where it is. Okay, so if you're like boom, ba, boom, boom, bada, boom, bish, ba, boom, ba, boom, you can leave that cue, that click, where it is relative to where you're playing, because your notes as you're going along with that going are still evenly spaced. Okay, then you can very slowly get back to it if you elect, or you can leave it there the whole time if you're that good of a musician. Remember, like I said before, if you go and analyze older recordings, if you get, especially in this day and age, with like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, there's a lot of things now people can strip out. You can get like bass only, or guitar only, or backup vocals only, or drums only. If you really listen to those drums, you can really hear in there little spots where the snare drum's dragged or rush. But in the context of stuff when it's all finally done and put together, I'm talking without a click track or even with, you don't notice it. Okay, listen to Won't Get Fooled Again. When Keith Moon first comes in, or I'm sorry, Baba O'Reilly. Ba ba ba. Ba ba. He really gets ahead of it there, a lot, and then he, not so slowly, pretty quickly brings it back to the tempo. You don't really notice it. Okay, so again, two things. You don't necessarily have to play exactly to the click the whole time. In fact, if you get off it a little bit very gradually and get back onto it very gradually, that will simulate a human being's pretty much perfect sense of time. Remember, human beings for 3 minutes cannot play exactly 118. They can't. You might say 1 in a trillion years it might have happened, but they can't. We're not robots, okay? We have emotions and other things, okay? So what I'm going to do is explain two things. First, what I do when I practice to a metronome, which then later makes it easier to play to a click if you're gonna, but ways I practice to a metronome that just aren't really boring. Okay, sometimes you could just sit and, sometimes it just seems really boring, especially with a metronome proper. You just hear dut, 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 dut. Okay, I'll show you a couple techniques I use to make it more interesting, but also really incorporate a lot of the meter type things that you can do to play along with it as well. Namely, like meter, you might be like dut, 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 like that type of thing, okay? Where you'd break up between, quarter notes, eighth notes, sixteenths, but then into an eighth note triplet, back to eighth notes. That's really good for your operational meter. So you can work that in around the drums too. Secondly, what I'll do is I'll show some ways that if you're not really used to playing to a click track or a metronome, ways that are easier for you to get more comfortable with it, okay? So that's what I'm going to do. There's kind of two ways to do it. You can sort of purely, as if you're practicing, really pay attention to really actively work to stay on the notes, like that type of thing, okay? Which, now to be honest, it's kind of really hard for me to relatively hear the click right now because I had to adjust it so it's not piercing. So there's two things you can generally do with the click. Right now the click's going, so I'm going to start playing. Play simple time. I would call that the first method for you to do. If you're not familiar playing to a click or a metronome, just play a basic beat along to a constant, maybe 110, 115, 120. So you have more cues with which to play along to, like that, okay? Treat then your filly parts, or you're playing around the drums, like meter stuff, to a second exercise. Like do it separately then, okay? Go like this. That type of thing, okay? That type of thing. So then what happens is this. Oftentimes, especially drummers, what drummers usually do is when they go into fills or setups for changes, small fills or big fills, oftentimes we'll rush them just a teeny bit. You know, like as an exaggeration. Okay, that's what I mean. You'll slightly go into the fill a little faster and often come out a little ahead, meaning slightly before where the downbeat would be. Now, if there's a little bit of that in anybody's regular performance, with or without a click track, you don't notice it because I think generally we as human beings being emotional, or you could just say for the past 50 years of listening to music, before really modern music, before hip-hop and straight-up drum machine stuff, we just heard it all the time, okay? So, a good thing to do if you've never really had a lot of practice is to play along time for a while, then go into play simple fills, okay? And what will happen is the more you practice that, you'll really become aware. Like at first, when you're going into fills and going around, you'll be like, wow, like you might actually think sometimes this is what happens. If people aren't really used to practicing to a metronome or a click, sometimes they'll say, wow, that click is slowing down. Did that thing slow down? Like if they go into a fill, relative to them, it seems like it's slowing down because they're speeding up. Things are relative, okay? At least from the eye of from the third party eye, you'd clearly see that the drummer sped up, right? But from the drummer's point of view, often it can seem like this slowed down, okay? So that's a great way, if you just keep doing it over and over again, to really realize and internalize the fact that sometimes you, as a drummer or musician, might rush certain changes or fills. The more you do it, the more you become aware of it. And over a long period of time, you'll probably internalize it so much you might not ever have to think about it again. But in the short run, you can pretty quickly sort of get your ducks in a row with that and realize if you're conscious, you do it, right? Even after a few times practicing or playing, when you go in to record, you can bear it in mind when fills come up, right? But this is what I do to make playing to a click track more fun and not just straight like... Okay, just like playing straight up like Randy Robot. What I'll do is I'll put the click on, usually about 115 beats per minute, and I'll just play along with it for like 5 or 10 minutes. I won't play that long now, but what I'll do is I'll play regular time, play then slightly busier beats, then go around and play fills around, but while mixing in your meter work, meaning like boom bot boom boom bot daga 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 dum dum ba 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 ba. Here we're going like from eighth notes to quarter notes to sixteenths to eighth note triplets. That is really how you round your meter out. So this is what I do. I'll pop the click track on, or the metronome, and just play along, but watch what I do. I'll mix up playing time with fills, but also different like metered fills, like eighth, like triplet feel fills or straight up. And what I'll do sometimes too is I'll play off the main beat. So instead of click, 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 I'll go like this. Click, 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 click. Like I'll move it around, okay? So the click relatively then goes on the upbeat. So my time and my meter staying relative to Timeberg. It's just that I'm sort of playing around the time, but still in the grid section, not totally loosely around it, okay? Like this, okay? See how I'm playing around it, okay? Like the main pulse is going, but I'm mixing in some eighth notes and some 16th notes and then some triplet stuff, but then changing instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, and I'm going like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. So the whole pulse is staying the same, but I'm just moving the relative time around. That's kind of more fun. It's interesting to kind of it's challenging and it's fun to do, but it also is still incorporating perfect time into you. You're sort of having a lot of experience playing perfect time, okay? So, and there's a bunch of different things you can do too, which is like one limited time, okay? Because remember, like I've said in other videos, especially with our hands, when we first learn to play the drums, our strong hand right off the bat usually gets stronger, playing all the quarter notes and the eighth notes and all the time stuff, while our left hand usually plays a backbeat or an upbeat or whatever the hell you want to call it. So it's good to do one limited time, especially focusing on your weak arm, like in my case, my left hand, okay? So what I'll do is I'll usually then slow the metronome down, okay? Instead, I mean, might play it at 115 for a little while like this. So things like that, okay, because you can kind of get that little, let's say the right hemisphere of my brain vis-a-vis my left arm, up to really, then if you isolate one thing, it'll join the pack, hopefully as a better developed globule, okay? So that's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do is this is how I practice to it. What I'll do first is I'll play more of a rudimentary, what's sort of easier and a good way to start, and then adding slight fills. Remember, working your way to fills, because you'll find the most problem area with drummers is when you go to fills and then have to come back in on the time. That's somewhere to spend a lot of time on, okay? But then also to eventually work your way up. We're playing, you know, on upbeats and then downbeats, which kind of works out to be odd meters for a minute, kind of, and then coming back. Like, I'll show you what I'll do is I'll also play the crunge to the click here, okay? And you'll see what happens is because the crunge is in an odd meter, I'll do the psst, bat, ba, 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 ba. When you come in and out, you're on the click for a while, and then you're off, and then you're on. I mean, you're on the click the whole time, except you're on the eighth. You'll see what I mean, because it's the nature of a odd meter thingy. So check this out. type of thing, okay? But now what I'll do is this. Like, for example, you can play... Here's a good thing to do, too. Instead of hearing the click like dot, 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 you can even make it semi-sequencery in your head by making it more melodic in a weird way. Like, one thing I like to do is go dang, 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 da, 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 just like that. So like ba, 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 because it gives it sort of, it's like the illusion that it's an actual song. Like there's sort of like it's a semi-sad sort of melody line going constant. Like you're sort of looping, maybe like a rap thing. What was that song from years ago? And dan, 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 ba, 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 ba. I mean, like 30 years ago, right? But you can do it more like little minor. Ba, 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 ba. It's like a simple little song, but keep the pulse on, okay? Ba, 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 ba. That's something I do too, okay? But also, let me do the crunch thing I was telling you about. See right there, I'm back on. So if I were to sing that, okay? You can do that too. Whatever you do just to play to it and play along to it, you don't necessarily, again, have to think about it so much. After a while, you just sort of start playing along to it. What other people sometimes say is, imagine you're playing with the percussionist next to you that has like those rosewood blocks or a cowbell or something, who has perfect time, and you just play along to him, okay? The more you do it, the better. At the very least, you work your meter out. You will. That's the great skill of it. Work your meter, your individual. That type of thing, which is golden. You should play to a metronome anyway for that type of stuff, okay? But if you get on the kit, you can make it more musical, go around, and what happens is, here's another thing too. The more notes you play per given, like if you're playing 16ths, click, 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 click. It's easier to do that than it is if you're just leaving space in there. Click, 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 because there's less cues that your body's already doing, okay? So if you're sitting there playing like a solo to a click, not a solo, but a lot of notes, that's easier to do than if you're just playing, let's say, a one note. If you're doing it, not a lot of notes, where your body doesn't have the whole pulse physically going the whole time. Like you're going. And that becomes more apparent if you if you cut the metronome in half, signal-wise. So instead of da, 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 we'll just get da, da. This one's out, da, da, half the pace, okay? I now have it at 56, okay? That's slightly less than half of the 115. But I'll show you what I mean. You can still play the same pace and everything to that click. It's just there's one of them missing. You're only hearing every other one. So you have to rely on a stronger sense of time, okay? So here, instead of dot, 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 like every other one's missing. Okay, it gets a little harder to play to less notes like that. Okay, your cue, it's like going, like I said, going through a dark room. Suddenly there's less sofas to go through, but you have to keep going at the same pace. You can't stop, right? So that's playing like the same pace I was at the 115, but there's just half the cue notes. Okay, but check this out. So then instead of then going, again, it's easier to play to less notes like this. If you're doing 16ths or a lot of notes, but if you have to go like this, it takes a little more. You have to have a stronger skill to do it, or really, really listen to it and focus on it, okay? Okay, and if I slow that way down, you'll really see with me. I mean, with anybody down at like, here we are, 36 beats per minute, okay? Watch. I mean, that's hard, okay? It's a little easier than if you have more notes. So what'll happen is you'll find your sort of pocket with it. But that takes a lot more skill to do because you have much fewer notes with which to work with. That's why the opposite of that is, if you play with more clicks, okay, or a sequencer, okay, that's what it all boils down to with playing and stuff to a click. So that's the deal. Okay, now here's the thing. Here's the rub. It's not the rub, but the deal. A lot of younger drummers today, in the past 30 years, since like the mid-late 80s, right? Drum machines really came in and got really popular. Not just, a lot of people used to use them just to compose with. Like if you see old documentaries of Sting, he had this boombox that would play a drum machine like, and he'd just grab his guitar and start playing over it like making up songs. Everybody did that then. I mean, Phil Collins was known for it too, but eventually what like Phil Collins and Prince and some of these people did is the drum machine they'd use to compose with, they'd leave in the song, and it was then the drums of the song, okay? Like I said, Man on a Corner before. Okay, there's a lot of stuff like that Phil Collins does, like In the Air Tonight, okay? Those were like rolling drum machines that they would just sort of, that they'd leave in, okay? Now, around that time in the early 80s, the whole structure, melodic, tempo structure of the song would be dictated then on perfect time. That's pretty much as close to perfect time you can get, with the exception of an atomic clock, right? I mean, even the variability of digital stuff, even over long periods of 20 or 30 years, might not be, again, perfect, okay? Not a lot of stuff is, even digital stuff, it'll be perfect for maybe 3 hours or 10 months, but over a long, long period of time, it will start to deviate from perfection. It will. That's just the way the world works, okay? So, I want you to know again, so you don't shite a brick if you're going to go and record to a click track, because, again, these days, they can fix it, okay? They can quantize it, and then from there, ironically, from then perfect, they took maybe your not-so-perfect drum playing to a click, make it perfect, but then they can make it unperfect again a little, but in a more smoother way as far as tempo goes, which is what then, if you have a really, really good drummer, or a really good performance by a drummer to a click track, there might be, they might come out a little ahead or a little behind the fills and be a little off the click, but then they consistently stay there with the click because then their time is still just as even. They might work their way, like I said before, back to the click, which is usually done, or maybe just leave it there. A lot of people have really strong senses of time, okay? But even like human beings playing to a click track in the old days with tape. It wasn't the same as quantizing. Even though they play really, really good, human beings still playing to that beat. Like if you were to really analyze, remember a beat, it's like the center of a mass object. It's a little teeny thing. It's like where do you design, where does it begin or end? I mean, if you had a click that went doot, 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 I mean, you could say it's the very first sound. It's not necessarily the whole, okay, remember I said in other videos where people, when I use the terms playing ahead or playing behind, everybody, they're common terms. But you remember like Queen's We Will Rock You. Okay, well that is a bunch of people clapping. Okay, some people naturally have a sense of time, usually real sort of hyped up, sort of type A type people. They want it done yesterday. Okay, here we are. Do it right now. Do it like this. Well, so when everybody claps, a lot of people will consistently be one of the first people that claps. So they'll be the first. They'll be in there. Okay. A lot of regular people, maybe the average people, generally might clap around where the downbeats just generally fell. Right in there. And then some maybe people that are like totally laid back, like what? They might consistently be at the end. At the end there, okay? But that's why you get a. But then also there's the variation of sometimes people just maybe not at the best time or whatever. Just sometimes they're kind of on and sometimes they're kind of off. So if you're a little ahead of the beat, you'll be like. You're playing just consistently slightly ahead of that beat. Now, if somebody plays consistent, let me try this. I'll play consistently a little ahead of this beat. Okay, let me ask around with this. First, I have to get it back to. Let's put it 115. 115 to me is a nice tempo. So let me just play. I really got to figure out a way to make this louder in these headphones. So if I play a little ahead. See how I'm constant, like the whole time that click, the click is a little behind me, so it's going like click, 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 click. But to the person just listening to what I'm playing without the click there, my notes are even. Okay, that's what happens. Now, I said this before, like I said, the Who's Next album, Keith Moon, Baba O'Reilly, if you listen to that in that intro when Keith Moon first comes in with the drums, he's way off the click. But then he kind of comes back to it, but you don't really notice it in the context of the music, okay? One of the biggest dilemmas I had back in the day, I remember I had to go in and play. We had this band and we were going to record, and they're like, all right, we're going to use a click track. I was like, fine. At the time, I used to practice to a metronome like meter and stuff. So we went in, I could barely hear it, and I had all these mistakes all over it. Everybody else in the band thought it sounded fine. The producer we hired thought it sounded great. I can't even listen to the damn thing. Because what I did the whole time is if I got a little off the click, usually ahead, I'd immediately try to come back to the click. Like my thing was like, I'm off, I better fix it right now. And you notice it's like doom, da, doom, da, doom, da. But then from that point, it's good. It was awful, okay? So if you get off the click, you just can slowly get back on. It's the gradual nature of how human beings are. Things happen like this. If you play to a click or anything linear like that, if you have a little bit of this, you won't really notice it. We're human beings. Because before a click was ever designed, the music we ever heard, even constant pieces, before you even would change the tempo, might go like this because we're human. Okay? It's the way it works. So hopefully this is helpful. Let me go out just playing along to this click. Stuff that I would normally do. Okay? Just for fun. Now, I might go off it, okay? Because if I want to have fun, I'm just going to really play around. There might be points that I'm off it, okay? But what can you do? But again, it's a good exercise just to build your internal clock up, etc. Here we go. Disco Inferno. Disco, disco, disco Inferno. It's like Man in a Suitcase. Ba, 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 ba. See how I'm leaving the click up on the off? And there's no law to you can. A lot of folks might even play it there because if sometimes like the way I feel with the click if I'm recording, I have this thing. It's like an anxiety. I need to kind of hear the click. People will say, "Oh, don't worry about it. If you're playing to the click, you're not going to hear it because your bass drum and your snare on it the whole time." That happens sometimes, but if I get kind of freaked out by it, sometimes I might play a little ahead or a little behind because I always just need to hear that click just to be safe, right? But a way around that for a lot of people is to put that on the upbeat. So instead of you'll go like this. Dun, 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 dun. Like that, okay? So that's the thing. You can hear it. By the way, I started to get off at the end, okay? You have to really practice at it, okay? 3 and 4 and... Okay, you just fool around with it, okay? Because you can kind of make it fun and challenging. Crunge. Which reminds me, play along in your mind to some songs. Put the click like if you're gonna do again, I'm a Zeppelin guy. Da na 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 na, ba da na na na, blah blah. You can do that. Ba da 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 da, ba da 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 da. Okay, you can do that too. But also, what you can do too is just play along to modern music. Or that you know has been quantized or played to a click, because essentially then you're playing to a sequencer is what you're doing, okay? I hope this was very helpful, okay? Keep coming back, more videos on the way. More covers coming. I just got these brand new headphones, which are really nice. I really have to do something about the click, though, because it's so piercing. Even if I really lower the volume and mess with the EQ, it still blasts through to the camera, okay? But when I try to then attenuate it, make it not so loud there, I can't really turn the volume that much up in my headphones. But with music, I can, like a regular recording. So the neat thing is, there's tons of modern songs that you can now play on YouTube or play along to his covers without getting in trouble. There's some Zeppelin stuff you can do, okay? There's a few songs right off records you can use. A lot of it is stuff that's been reissued. So let's say, for example, I really wanted to do No Quarter live, the 1973 No Quarter, one of my favorite live Zeppelin recordings. Bonham and Page and everybody, they're on fire. But the thing is, the only one that's approved, the only version of it, is the remastered 2007. Well, if I go onto Google Play or YouTube, I can't buy it for 99 cents. I got to buy the whole $19 record, which is I'm going to do. I mean, Page and Warner Chappell, those guys are smart. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, yeah, you can play this one. Oh, but it's not available singularly. Well, just give me $20 and you can have the whole thing. Anyway, so that's coming down the pipeline. I hope this was helpful. More videos on the way. Have a good weekend.